In the small town of Pine Ridge, life moved slowly. The streets were quiet and everyone knew each other by name. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes down dirt paths, laughter echoed through backyards, and neighbors shared fresh-baked pies over wooden fences. But all of that changed one summer day in 1997, when a young boy named Jacob Williams disappeared without a trace. Jacob was 10 years old, with curly black hair and bright brown eyes that always seemed to sparkle with mischief. He loved playing, outside, especially near the edge of the forest that bordered his neighborhood. The woods fascinated him. There were tall trees, hidden trails, and countless adventures waiting to be discovered. His mother, Laura, often warned him not to go too far into the trees. "Stay close to home," she would say, her voice firm but gentle. "You never know what's out there." Jacob always nodded and promised he'd listen, but like most children, his age, curiosity often got the better of him. On the morning of July 15, 1997, Jacob woke up early. The sun was shining brightly and the air smelled sweet from the wildflowers growing along the roadside. After finishing breakfast, he grabbed his favorite red baseball cap and ran outside to play. His best friend, Kevin, lived just 2 houses down, so they planned to meet up later to ride their bikes. For now, though, Jacob decided to explore the area around the forest alone. He walked toward the tree line, stepping carefully over roots and rocks. The ground felt soft beneath his sneakers, and the leaves above rustled softly in the breeze. Jacob imagined himself as an explorer searching for treasure or a brave knight on a quest. He picked up sticks and pretended they were swords, swinging them at invisible enemies. Every step deeper into the woods felt like another adventure unfolding before him. At first, everything seemed normal. Birds chirped overhead, and squirrels darted between branches. But as Jacob ventured further, the sounds of the neighborhood faded away. The deeper he went, the quieter it became. Shadows stretched long across the forest floor, and the light, filtering through the canopy, grew dimmer. Still, Jacob didn't feel afraid. To him, this was just part of the fun, a chance to prove how brave he could be. By mid-afternoon, Laura began to worry. She called Kevin's house to ask if he'd seen Jacob, but Kevin said they hadn't met up yet. That's when panic started to creep in. Laura checked the backyard, the street, and even the park nearby, but there was no sign of her son. Her heart raced as she realized something wasn't right. Jacob had never stayed out this long without telling her where he was going. Laura immediately called the police, her hands trembling as she held the phone. Officers arrived quickly, asking questions about Jacob's last known whereabouts and organizing a search party. Dozens of volunteers joined the effort, including friends, family members, and neighbors. They combed through the forest with flashlights and lanterns, calling out Jacob's name into the darkening night. Dogs trained to track scents sniffed the ground, hoping to pick up any trace of the missing boy. Despite the massive effort, nothing turned up. There were no footprints leading away from the forest, no torn pieces of clothing caught on branches, and no signs of struggle. It was as if Jacob had simply vanished into thin air. The longer he remained missing, the more fear gripped the community. Parents kept their own children close, afraid of what might happen if they wandered too far. Teachers talked about Jacob during school assemblies, reminding students to stay safe and stick together. Even the local news covered the story, sharing photos of Jacob and urging anyone with information to come forward. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no word. Laura barely slept, spending hours staring out the window, hoping to see her son walking up the driveway. Friends brought meals to her house, trying to offer comfort, but nothing could ease the pain of not knowing. Detective Miller, the officer assigned to the case, visited regularly, promising Laura that they wouldn't give up until they found answers. But as time passed, leads dried up and hope began to fade. The disappearance left a lasting mark on Pine Ridge. Conversations about Jacob became hushed whispers at grocery stores and coffee shops. People wondered if he had run away, been kidnapped, or fallen victim to some tragic accident. Some even speculated about supernatural explanations, pointing to old legends about the forest being haunted. Whatever the truth was, no one could deny that Jacob's absence had changed the town forever. For Laura, every milestone, the birthdays Jacob missed, the holidays spent without him, was a painful reminder of what she had lost. She hung his picture on the wall, keeping candles lit beside it as if somehow the flame might guide him back home. Her husband, Daniel, tried his best to support her, but he knew there was little he could do to fill the void left by Jacob's disappearance. Together, they clung to the hope that someday, somehow, they would find out what happened to their son. As the months went by, the search effort slowed down, but Laura refused to give up. She posted flyers, contacted private investigators, and reached out to organizations specializing in missing persons cases. Each new lead brought a flicker of hope, only to be extinguished when it led nowhere. Eventually, the world outside Pine Ridge stopped paying attention, moving on to newer headlines and bigger stories. But for those who lived in the town, Jacob's memory lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder of the unanswered questions that haunted them all. And so, life in Pine Ridge continued, shaped by the weight of the unknown. The forest loomed large, in everyone's minds, its towering trees hiding secrets that no one dared to uncover. Yet deep down, people couldn't help but wonder, what really happened to Jacob Williams? Was he still alive somewhere waiting to be found? Or had the woods claimed him forever, leaving behind only silence and sorrow? Though no one could have guessed it at the time, the answer to these questions would remain buried for 23 long years. As the years passed, life in Pine Ridge slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The town healed, or at least tried to, but the memory of Jacob Williams never fully faded. For Laura, Jacob's mother, time didn't bring peace. It only deepened the ache she carried in her heart. She often found herself staring at old photographs of her son, running her fingers over his smiling face, as if trying to bring him back to life. Her days were filled with quiet routines, cooking meals, tending to her garden, and working part-time at the local library. But every night, before going to bed, she would sit by the window, gazing out at the dark forest that had swallowed her, boy whole. Laura wasn't alone in her grief. Daniel, her husband, did everything he could to support her. He listened patiently when she needed to talk and held her close when tears overwhelmed her. Still, there were moments when even Daniel felt powerless against the weight of her sorrow. Sometimes late at night, Laura would wake up crying, calling out Jacob's name. Those nights were the hardest for both of them. The people of Pine Ridge tried to move on too. Children who had once played alongside Jacob grew into teenagers and then adults. Some left town for college or jobs in bigger cities, while others stayed behind, raising families of their own. But no matter where they went, the story of Jacob's disappearance lingered like an unspoken shadow. Parents still warned their kids about wandering too far into the woods, and teachers occasionally mentioned Jacob during lessons about safety. Even strangers visiting the town sometimes heard whispers about the boy who vanished without a trace. One person who couldn't shake the mystery was Emily Dawson. Emily had been just a toddler when Jacob disappeared, so she didn't remember much about the frantic search efforts or the endless news coverage. But as she grew older, the story fascinated her. It started with an old shoebox she found in her grandmother's attic one rainy afternoon. Inside the box were yellowed newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and faded photographs related to Jacob's case. Her grandmother, Margaret, explained that she had followed the investigation closely because it reminded her of how fragile life could be. Emily sat cross-legged on the attic floor, flipping through the brittle pages. One article caught her attention, a grainy picture of Jacob wearing his red baseball cap, standing beside a tree in his backyard. His smile was wide and carefree, completely unaware of what lay ahead. Another clipping described the massive search operation, mentioning names of volunteers and detailing the areas they had scoured. Emily read each word carefully, feeling a strange mix of sadness and curiosity. From that day forward, Emily became obsessed with learning more about Jacob's disappearance. She borrowed books from the library about true crime, watched documentaries about missing persons cases, and pored over online forums discussing unsolved mysteries. At school, she wrote essays and gave presentations about the importance of solving cold cases. Her classmates thought she was weird for being so interested in something that happened so long ago, But Emily didn't care. To her, Jacob wasn't just a name in a headline. He was a real person whose story deserved to be told. When Emily turned 18, she decided to pursue journalism as a career. She dreamed of uncovering truths hidden beneath layers of lies and forgotten memories. After graduating high school, she enrolled in a nearby community college, taking classes in writing, research, and investigative techniques. Her professors noticed her passion and encouraged her to keep digging deeper. "You have a gift," one of them told her after reading an essay she wrote about Jacob's case. "Don't let it go to waste." While studying, Emily continued to follow any updates about Jacob's disappearance, though there weren't many. Occasionally, a local reporter would revisit the case around anniversaries or holidays, reminding readers that the mystery remained unsolved. These articles reignited Emily's determination to find answers. She began reaching out to people connected to the case, starting with Detective Miller, the officer who had led the original investigation. Detective Miller was retired by then, living in a cozy house on the outskirts of town. When Emily called to request an interview, he hesitated at first. Talking about Jacob's case brought back painful memories, ones he had tried hard to bury. But something about Emily's voice, her sincerity and genuine interest, convinced him to meet with her. Over coffee at a diner downtown, they discussed the details of the case, poring over old files and notes. Miller shared stories about the tireless efforts made to find Jacob, describing the frustration of hitting dead end after dead end. "It's the kind of case that sticks with you," Miller said, shaking his head. "We did everything we could, but sometimes the answers just aren't there." Despite the lack of progress, Emily refused to give up hope. She spent hours combing through public records, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. She interviewed neighbors who had lived near the Williams family in 1997, asking if they remembered seeing or hearing anything unusual around the time of Jacob's disappearance. Most of them shook their heads, saying it had been too long ago to recall clearly. But a few offered vague recollections. Strange noises in the night, unfamiliar cars parked on the street, shadows moving in the woods, that sent shivers down Emily's spine. One name kept coming up during her interviews: Harold Gibbs. Harold had been a recluse who lived in a ramshackle cabin deep in the forest. Back in 1997, rumors swirled about him disliking children and keeping to himself. Some folks claimed they'd seen him lurking near the edge of the woods, watching kids play. Others whispered about strange sounds coming from his property at night. The police had questioned Harold briefly during their initial investigation, but ultimately dismissed him as a suspect due to lack of evidence. Still, Emily couldn't ignore the connection. Determined to learn more, she visited Harold's old cabin. By now it was abandoned, its wooden walls warped and rotting from years of neglect. Weeds choked the yard, and vines crept up the sides of the structure like ghostly fingers. Emily stepped inside cautiously, her flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The air smelled musty and the floorboards groaned under her weight. Everywhere she looked, there were signs of decay. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and piles of debris scattered across the room. But amidst the chaos, Emily noticed something odd. In one corner of the cabin, hidden beneath a pile of blankets, was a metal lockbox. Her heart raced as she knelt down to examine it. The lock was rusted shut, but with some effort she managed to pry it open. Inside, she found a collection of items that made her blood run cold. A crumpled photograph of Jacob, a piece of fabric matching the shirt he wore the day he disappeared, and a map marked with locations throughout the forest. Emily's hands trembled as she stared at the objects. Could this be the breakthrough she had been searching for? She carefully gathered the evidence and took it to the authorities, explaining how she had discovered it. At first, the officers were skeptical, questioning why a young journalist was poking around an abandoned cabin. But when they saw the contents of the lockbox, their skepticism turned to intrigue. Detective Miller, now acting as a consultant on the reopened case, agreed to take another look at the evidence. With modern forensic tools unavailable in 1997, they hoped to extract new information from the items. DNA testing confirmed that the fabric belonged to Jacob, and handwriting analysis suggested that the markings on the map matched Harold's penmanship. Though Harold himself had died years earlier under mysterious circumstances, these findings reignited interest in the case. For Emily, this was more than just a journalistic pursuit. It was personal. She imagined Jacob as a scared little boy, lost and alone in the vast forest. She thought about his mother, waiting all those years for answers. And she wondered if, by piecing together the fragments of the past, she could finally bring closure to a family torn apart by tragedy. As the investigation gained momentum, Emily knew she was onto something big. The discovery at Harold's cabin was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, hidden among the trees and shadows, lay the truth about what happened to Jacob Williams. And Emily was determined to uncover it, no matter how long it took, or how dangerous the journey might be. The discovery at Harold Gibbs's cabin sent ripples through the town of Pine Ridge. For years, the case of Jacob Williams had been a cold trail, a mystery buried under layers of time and unanswered questions. But now, with new evidence in hand, it felt like the forest itself was beginning to give up its secrets. Emily Dawson, the young journalist who had uncovered the lockbox, couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something monumental. Her heart raced every time she thought about the map, the fabric, and the photograph, all pieces of a puzzle that might finally reveal what happened to Jacob. Detective Miller, though retired, threw himself back into the investigation with renewed energy. He worked closely with the current police team, sharing his knowledge of the case while learning about modern forensic techniques. The fabric found in the lockbox was sent to a lab for further analysis, and detectives reviewed old records related to Harold Gibbs. They discovered that Harold had been questioned multiple times over the years, not just about Jacob's disappearance but also about other strange incidents in the area. Neighbors had reported hearing screams coming from his property late at night, and some claimed they'd seen him dragging heavy bags into the woods. At the time, these reports were dismissed as gossip or paranoia, but now they took on a darker significance. Emily spent countless hours researching Harold's life. She visited the town library, flipping through old newspapers and yearbooks, searching for any mention of him. What she found painted a troubling picture. Harold had lived alone in his cabin for decades, rarely interacting with others. People described him as odd, reclusive, and sometimes hostile. One article mentioned that he had once been accused of vandalizing a local school playground, but was let off with a warning because there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. Another clipping talked about how he had chased kids away from his property with threats and loud shouting. Despite all this, no one had ever suspected Harold of being involved in Jacob's disappearance. Back in 1997, investigators hadn't considered him a serious suspect because there was no concrete proof linking him to the crime. Now, with the new evidence, everything seemed different. Emily couldn't help but wonder if Harold had been hiding something sinister all along, if he had known more than he let on. One evening, after spending hours poring over documents, Emily decided to visit the forest again. She wanted to see if she could make sense of the map found in Harold's cabin. The map was crudely drawn, with markings indicating specific spots throughout the woods. Some areas were circled in red ink, while others had notes scribbled beside them, such as "too close" or "hidden well." Emily didn't know exactly what these phrases meant, but they gave her chills. Armed with a flashlight and a notebook, she ventured into the forest, following the trails marked on the map. It was eerie walking among the trees at dusk, especially knowing the history behind this place. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the air grew cooler with each step she took. Birds chirped softly in the distance, but otherwise the forest was eerily quiet. Emily tried to stay focused, reminding herself why she was here, to find answers for Jacob and his family. She reached the first location marked on the map, a cluster of rocks near a dried-up stream bed. There didn't seem to be anything unusual about the spot, so she moved on to the next one. As she walked deeper into the woods, the path became narrower and harder to navigate. Roots twisted up from the ground, and thick vines blocked her way. Several times she had to stop and use her hands to push branches aside. Finally, she arrived at a clearing labeled "Hidden Well." At first glance, it looked like an ordinary patch of earth, overgrown with weeds and moss. But as Emily examined it more closely, she noticed something odd. The ground here was softer than the surrounding area, and there were signs of disturbance, fresh dirt mixed with older soil. Her stomach tightened as she realized what this might mean. Taking a deep breath, Emily called Detective Miller. When he answered, she explained where she was and what she had found. His voice turned serious as he told her not to touch anything and to wait for backup. Within an hour, a team of officers arrived, equipped with shovels and forensic tools. They began digging carefully, layer by layer, until they uncovered something that made everyone freeze. A small wooden box, partially buried beneath the earth. Inside the box, they found more chilling items: a rusty bicycle chain, scraps of fabric matching Jacob's shirt, and a journal filled with handwritten entries. The pages were brittle and faded, but the words were still legible. Much of the writing was disjointed and hard to understand, but one phrase appeared repeatedly: "They took me." When Emily read those words, her mind raced. Who was they? And why would someone write such a thing? She shared her thoughts with Detective Miller, who agreed that the journal might hold the key to unraveling the mystery. Together, they decided to analyze it further, hoping to piece together the events leading up to Jacob's disappearance. Back at the police station, the team worked tirelessly to decode the journal. Some entries described moments of fear and confusion, while others hinted at captivity. One passage stood out in particular. "I can hear them outside talking about moving me. I don't know where I am, but I think it's far from home." This line suggested that Jacob had been alive for some time after disappearing, possibly held against his will. As news of the discovery spread, the town of Pine Ridge buzzed with speculation. People gathered in coffee shops and grocery stores, whispering about the latest developments. Laura, Jacob's mother, was both hopeful and terrified. After 23 years of waiting, she finally had a chance to learn the truth. But what if the truth was worse than she imagined? Emily visited Laura to share what she had learned so far. Sitting in Laura's living room, surrounded by photographs of Jacob, Emily explained the findings in careful detail. She showed Laura the journal and read aloud some of the entries. Tears streamed down Laura's face as she listened, clutching a tissue in trembling hands. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that her son's story might finally come to light, but the investigation wasn't over yet. Detectives continued combing through Harold's past, interviewing anyone who had known him. They learned that Harold had bragged to a few neighbors about having a secret place deep in the forest, a place where no one could find him. This clue led them to search even farther into the woods, guided by the map and Harold's cryptic notes. Each day brought new discoveries, each one bringing them closer to the truth. Emily stayed involved every step of the way, determined to see the case through to the end. She knew that solving Jacob's disappearance wouldn't bring him back, but it could provide closure for his family and justice for his memory. And maybe, just maybe, it could prove that even the darkest secrets couldn't stay hidden forever. As the sun set over Pine Ridge, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the answers might not be easy to face, but she was ready. Whatever lay buried in the woods, she would uncover it, one step at a time. The investigation into Jacob Williams' disappearance had taken a dramatic turn. With each new discovery, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, painting a clearer but far darker picture of what might have happened to the young boy. Emily Dawson and Detective Miller worked tirelessly alongside the police team, following every lead and examining every clue. The map found in Harold Gibbs's cabin became their guide, leading them deeper into the forest and closer to the truth. 1. Morning, armed with shovels, flashlights, and forensic kits, the team set out to explore another location marked on the map. This spot was labeled Final Rest, written in shaky handwriting that sent chills down everyone's spines. It was located near a cluster of ancient oak trees, their gnarled roots twisting up from the ground like skeletal fingers. The air here felt heavier, almost oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As they began digging, the soil was loose and damp, making the work easier but no less unsettling. After several hours, someone's shovel struck something solid, a sound that made everyone freeze. Slowly, carefully, they cleared away the dirt to reveal what lay beneath. It was a shallow grave, hastily dug and partially covered by leaves and branches. Inside, wrapped in a tattered blanket, were human remains. The sight was heartbreaking. Though time and nature had taken their toll, enough evidence remained to confirm the identity of the body. Dental records matched those of Jacob Williams. For Laura, Jacob's mother, this was both a devastating blow and a long-awaited answer. Her son hadn't run away or been lost in the woods. He had been taken, held captive, and ultimately killed. The realization was unbearable, yet it brought a strange sense of closure. At least now she knew. Detectives continued analyzing the items found alongside the remains. The rusty bicycle chain, scraps of fabric, and journal entries all pointed to a horrifying conclusion. Jacob had been held against his will for some time before his death. The journal suggested he had tried to escape multiple times only to be caught and punished. His captor, or captors, had kept him isolated, feeding him just enough to survive while ensuring he couldn't leave. The phrase, "they took me," appeared repeatedly, hinting at more than one person being involved. Harold Gibbs's role in the tragedy became clearer as well. While he had died years earlier under mysterious circumstances, investigators uncovered evidence suggesting he had been deeply connected to Jacob's fate. Neighbors recalled how Harold had often complained about children playing too close to his property. He had even threatened to harm them if they didn't stay away. One neighbor admitted to hearing muffled cries coming from Harold's cabin late at night, but had dismissed it as wind or animals. Now, those memories took on a sinister tone. Further searches of Harold's cabin revealed more disturbing artifacts. In a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, officers found photographs of other children, along with notes detailing their routines and habits. It seemed Harold had been watching them for years, possibly planning to target others after Jacob. Thankfully, his death had prevented him from carrying out any further crimes, but the thought sent shivers through the entire town. Emily spent countless hours piecing together the timeline of events. She interviewed people who had known Harold, asking questions about his behavior and relationships. Some described him as angry and bitter, blaming the world for his misfortunes. Others said he was lonely, spending most of his time alone in the woods. No one had suspected him of anything truly evil until now. As the investigation progressed, Emily wrote articles for the local newspaper, sharing updates with the community. She wanted to keep the story alive, not only to honor Jacob's memory, but also to ensure that justice would be served. Her reports sparked outrage and sadness across Pine Ridge, uniting residents in their demand for accountability. Even though Harold was dead, people wanted answers. They needed to understand how such a tragedy could happen and why no one had noticed sooner. Laura struggled to process everything she was learning. Each new detail about Jacob's final days broke her heart all over again. Yet she found comfort in knowing that her son's story was finally being told. Emily visited her regularly, offering support and listening whenever Laura needed to talk. Together, they looked through old photo albums, remembering Jacob as the happy, curious boy he had been before his life was cut short. For Emily, solving the case became more than just a professional goal. It became personal. She imagined Jacob as a scared little boy, desperate to go home but trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. She thought about his family, waiting all those years for answers, and she vowed to do everything in her power to make sure no other child would suffer the same fate. Detective Miller shared Emily's determination. Though retired, he refused to step away from the case until every question was answered. He reviewed old interviews, re-examined evidence, and followed up on leads that had gone cold decades ago. His dedication inspired the younger officers working alongside him, reminding them of the importance of never giving up, even when hope seemed lost. As autumn settled over Pine Ridge, the forest grew quieter, its colors fading into shades of brown and gray. But the town buzzed with activity as news of the investigation spread. People gathered in coffee shops and parks discussing the latest developments. Teachers talked to students about stranger danger, emphasizing the importance of staying safe. Parents held their kids a little tighter, grateful for the loved ones they still had. Finally, after months of hard work, the investigation reached its conclusion. While Harold Gibbs had acted alone in abducting and holding Jacob captive, his actions were rooted in years of bitterness and isolation. Officers believed he had targeted Jacob because of his frequent visits to the edge of the forest, seeing him as an easy opportunity. Once Jacob was in his grasp, Harold had kept him hidden, using fear and intimidation to maintain control. The discovery of Jacob's remains allowed his family to lay him to rest properly. A small memorial service was held in the town square, attended by hundreds of people who had been touched by his story. Laura placed flowers on his grave, whispering words of love and forgiveness. Though the pain of losing him would never fully heal, she felt a sense of peace knowing that he was finally home. For Emily, the case marked a turning point in her career. She published a book detailing her journey to uncover the truth, hoping to raise awareness about missing children and the importance of solving cold cases. Her work earned praise from readers and critics alike, solidifying her reputation as a fearless journalist committed to seeking justice. And so, life in Pine Ridge slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such a tragedy. The forest remained a place of mystery and unease, its towering trees casting long shadows over the town. But for the first time in 23 years, the darkness that had haunted Pine Ridge began to lift. Jacob's story had been told, his memory honored, and his family given the closure they deserved. Yet even as the town moved forward, one question lingered in everyone's minds. Could something like this happen again? The answer was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The lessons learned from Jacob's disappearance would stay with Pine Ridge forever, shaping the way its residents lived, loved, and protected one another. The discovery of Jacob Williams' remains brought both relief and sorrow to the town of Pine Ridge. For Laura, Jacob's mother, it was a bittersweet moment. She had spent 23 years searching for answers, hoping against hope that her son might still be alive somewhere. Now she finally knew the truth, but it was far more painful than she could have imagined. Jacob had been taken from her, held captive, and ultimately killed. Yet despite the heartbreak, Laura felt a strange sense of peace. At last, she could lay her son to rest and begin the long journey toward healing. The memorial service for Jacob was held on a crisp autumn afternoon. The entire town turned out to pay their respects, filling the small park where Jacob used to play as a child. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers came together to honor his memory. A simple wooden cross stood at the center of the gathering, adorned with flowers, candles, and photographs of Jacob smiling brightly. Laura placed a red baseball cap, a replica of the one Jacob loved to wear, at the base of the cross, her hands trembling as she did so. As people shared stories about Jacob, laughter mingled with tears. They remembered him as a curious and kind boy who always had a smile on his face. Kevin, Jacob's childhood best friend, spoke about the adventures they used to have, racing bikes and building forts in the woods. "Jacob was my brother," Kevin said, his voice breaking. "He didn't deserve what happened to him, but I'll never forget how much joy he brought to everyone around him." Emily Dawson also attended the service, standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. She watched as Laura lit a candle and whispered something into the wind. Emily felt a deep sense of responsibility for helping bring closure to Jacob's family, but she also knew this wasn't the end of her work. The case had shown her just how many unanswered questions lingered in the world, and how important it was to keep searching for the truth, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. After the memorial, life in Pine Ridge slowly began to return to normal. The forest, once a place of mystery and fear, started to feel less ominous. Parents still warned their children not to wander too far, but the shadow of Jacob's disappearance no longer loomed quite so heavily over the town. Instead, his story became a reminder of the importance of community, vigilance, and love. For Emily, the experience changed her life in profound ways. She poured all her energy into writing a book about the case, detailing every step of the investigation. From the initial discovery of the lockbox in Harold Gibbs's cabin to the final uncovering of Jacob's remains. The book, titled Silent Woods, was published a year later and quickly gained attention. Readers were moved by Emily's dedication to uncover. I hit a character limit issue while generating text. Would you like me to continue expanding on part 5?